All right. Another episode of DAO Talk. This one's with our friend Clinamenic. Super excited to learn more about what he's working on in the DAO space today. Just as a little context for this particular DAO Talk interview, Clinamenic is the number one first place winner of the jokeDAO contest we did for DAO Talk, where anyone in the community could submit an under the radar DAO builder who's doing great work to come on DAO Talk. So Clinamenic got the most votes, which is super exciting. So yeah, should be a great conversation. With that being said, would love for you to get us started, Clinamenic, and just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got into working on what you're working on today in the DAO space.
Sure, happy to, and thanks for having me. I think this is a cool way of sourcing people for guests for a podcast, and I'm happy to be here. So my background is actually in film and television. I studied filmmaking, specifically screenwriting, and I worked in reality television for a bit. And then in 2020, it's like right before I heard of any kind of COVID-related stuff, I started getting into this distributed computing program put out by University of California, Berkeley, called Berkeley Open Infrastructure Network Computing. And they have all these programs that utilize spare computational power to run simulations to help researchers. And one of them was a protein folding simulator that rewarded you in this obscure cryptocurrency called Gridcoin. And that was the first I ever interacted with any kind of blockchain technology, any kind of Web3 distributed ledger, cryptocurrency, anything in that whole arena. And then from there, I got gradually more into retail investing. And then I also later on started learning a bit more about what DAOs are and the kind of non-financial applications and the governance applications of all this. And that's when I got into this DAO space.
I dig it. I love it. There's so many different types of people who work in DAOs, every day you meet someone different. It's I was a biochemist, I was a software engineer, I was a reality television, industry person. Super wild.
And that's one of my favorite parts about this space too, all the different people you meet.
Yeah, for sure. Have you carried over any of the reality television work into the DAO space, or have you yet to make that connection?
I've yet to make any kind of connection there. I mean, I'm watching what certain filmmakers are doing with this technology. There's the project that Roman Coppola is working on. There's a couple other kind of film and TV related projects, but I think that's we're still at a phase of first movers there. I'm not sure what, I feel like people are throwing stuff at a wall. I'm not sure what is sticking at this point, but I'm definitely watching that.
For sure. We have typical closing questions, but I'm going to try to remember to add one about what your favorite reality TV show is, because just have to ask that. But we'll get to that at the end of the episode. That's awesome. So yeah, class of 2020, 2021. I'm the same. I think a ton of DAO contributors actually are kind of belong to that crypto class. Pandemic started, looking for stuff to do online. Next thing you know, you're contributing to a DAO. So yeah, I dig it. So would love to kind of learn a little bit more about what you're working on today. So what DAOs have you landed in? What specifically are you focused on as a contributor?
The three that I'm involved in now are Pub DAO, jokeDAO, and Lobb3. Pub DAO was started by the team at Decrypt, and it started out as a decentralized newswire, and it's evolving into a content as a service DAO. So writers that produce content for clients, or promotional content or technical content, mainly written at this stage. And it's still early on, but it's a really cool example of a grassroots business development experiment. And that's what I'm doing there. I'm helping develop that business in an entirely volunteer capacity, because there's no funds to be paying business developers there yet. But it's a fascinating experiment, and we're getting a really good footing now. And I'm just honored to be involved in there. That's actually where I met Maurice. So thank you again to Maurice for recommending me for this podcast. And then the other two, Lobb3 is an advocacy DAO that was founded by Andrew Yang and a core team of people earlier this year. They're kind of the founding group of it, but the actual work being done under the title of Lobb3 is also pretty community driven. Happy to get into how that development has been, and a good example of how people get involved in DAOs and everything. I actually learned about Lobb3 from a Decrypt article. Just jumped in their Discord and started getting involved, and now I'm one of the two people helping lead it. And then jokeDAO is another kind of group of people that's like a professional network of journalists exploring Web3. And we're also at an early stage figuring out, like what kind of ideas we're going to be incubating, who our kind of primary audience is. It looks like our primary audience is Web2 journalists that are skeptical of this technology. So we're proving how it's not all financial and speculative and scammy, but there's actually some legitimate non-financial applications of this technology that could potentially revolutionize journalism. So happy to get into deeper detail with any of those, but those are the three that I'm splitting my time between.
I love it. Those are all super interesting DAOs. Yeah, you mentioned Maurice when talking about Pub DAO. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but anyone could submit anyone else, so they can submit themselves or like a friend to for our jokeDAO contest to find under the radar DAO builders. And so in this case, yeah, Maurice, who's a friend of DAO Talk, has worked with Tally on content and stuff like that before, submitted Clinamenic. So you love to see the community appreciation and the mutual support. Pub DAO is really cool. I was actually at MCon last week and I spoke to Reza quite a bit. We've just been like DMing about random stuff, but he's kind of running the DAO, like DAO ops for Reflexor Finance, which is like a big user of Tally. And that's like my primary day job is doing like go to market stuff for Tally. So anyway, Pub DAO is really cool. I actually think like there's some cool potential collaboration opportunities between Pub DAO and like what we're trying to do with content at Tally. So yeah, would love to dig in more there, as well as into Lobb3 and jokeDAO. But let's start with Pub DAO. So you mentioned you're focused on biz dev. Like I think people hear that word a lot. Maybe people who are less technical trying to break into the crypto space, like biz dev is kind of a title that's used a lot, but maybe not everyone knows exactly what it means. So what does it mean to focus on biz dev at Pub DAO?
So in our case, the business we're trying to develop is like a novel business, seemingly without much precedent, and we're still working out what aspects of it are feasible. It really is like a grassroots business development experiment of a bunch of people coming together on a Discord and figuring out how to set up a business model that we can then structure a DAO around. And to be clear, like at this stage, Pub DAO is still in a pre-DAO stage. There isn't a governance token because we're trying to get this business model set up so that we can actually have something substantial to build a DAO upon, rather than just the speculative goings on. But the business that we're developing started out as a decentralized newswire where Decrypt and a small kind of network of publishers were able to source content, Web3 related content, from writers in the Discord. But we figured out that there wasn't that much of we're running into some difficulties with publishers not wanting content that didn't have like clear licensing rights or didn't have clear like first right of refusal. And so since then we kind of shifted towards a service DAO model where we're doing written content as a service for clients. And then the actual business development that we've been doing here has shifted also, like even within this idea of written content as a service. Originally, we were just focused on putting together small teams of writers and editors that are dedicated to a client. We were calling these groups private pods that were kind of dedicated groups of writers that could be contracted in a retainer form so that a client could source content on a regular basis. Now we're also, more recently in the last couple of weeks, branching out to a much more kind of permissionless format where Pub DAO has a DWork page, and shout out to DWork. They're like instrumental for what we're doing. And we're having clients, like we're walking them through setting up a space on our DWork where they can post written content bounties for all of the writers in the Pub DAO kind of community. And so we're trying to set up this kind of decentralized marketplace of written content creation. Eventually we can broaden out beyond written content, but we're still trying to get a footing in how can we make this a sustainable business model while still allowing like a community of writers and creatives to be like empowered to create good content that isn't just shilly stuff that you normally see.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Trying to curate like very relevant content that is, like written by someone who is a good writer, but also has like real subject matter expertise in crypto, and is like really trying to cover, you know, novel ground. It is quite difficult. Like there's actually kind of like an industry of people who sort of like write shilly content sort of as fast as they can, just to like put it bluntly, and you kind of have to figure out how to like almost like incentivize or like curate or structure away from that towards folks who like are really trying to dig in. So totally hear you kind of on like trying to kind of figure that mix out. So with working on biz dev in that context, are you mostly talking to like other DAOs or other Web3 organizations that want content from Pub DAO, or is it mostly non-crypto institutions, or both?
Right now, it's been almost exclusively other Web3 groups. Usually not DAOs per se, but some of them have certain tokenized governance, but they've all been Web3 projects in some capacity. Some of them have been interested in trying to organize like a dedicated group of writers. Others just have like a few blog posts and a few like a white paper or something that they want written on like a one-off basis, and something like that would be suited for just posting a bounty on a DWork page where all the Pub DAO writers would get access to it. And I totally agree, by the way, with like figuring out an incentive model and a curation model to like give rise to content that isn't just shilly. And I mean, and even if we're not using like a pejorative for shilly, like a lot of the content out there is marketing, like marketing for this or that product or service, and that's how we're kind of trying to get enough revenue from content like that as a service, so that we can do content as a public good. The idea is that once there actually is a DAO and a DAO treasury, we can take service fees from that content as a service and then fund Pub DAO writers who want to launch publications that's about content that they think is important and isn't just promotional or like commercial content. And so there's like two sides of it, where there's the content that's being promoted, like promotional marketing content for clients, and then we want to use proceeds from that to fund content as a public good.
That's dope. That's dope. I love it. So I know you mentioned Lobb3 second, but I want to switch the order just to stay on the like journalism / writing train for a sec. So I would love to hear more about jokeDAO. I think you mentioned it's like you're kind of interfacing with not crypto native or like non Web3 native journalists. I would love to learn more. Is it like, are you trying to create sort of like an industry organization or like a social club or like an onboarding community, all of the above? Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, elements of all those, and you're right. It's mainly like we're trying to speak to journalists who aren't aware of Web3 or have an understanding of it as being scam ridden or just for financial speculation. So there's those kind of and those aren't myths, because most of the time those are right. If you look at the majority of activity in this space, there's a lot of that stuff. But I think like with the message we're trying to get across is the non-financial applications of this technology can be revolutionary if we can figure out like sustainable ways to use them. Like the kind of applications that we have in mind is like the immutability and the uncensorability of content stored on a distributed ledger could be really interesting for journalists who want to avoid censorship, either from some kind of authoritarian regime or some kind of corporate situation who may be in a position to censor content otherwise. Like if you post content on like in the Web 2 paradigm, if you post content that's stored on some central server somewhere else that's privately owned, you're kind of subject to the discretion of whoever's administrating those servers. And so like we're kind of building upon that on one side, and then the other side of the kind of pitch for Web3 journalism is that it could enable more of a direct, unmediated like economic model for journalists and content creators in general, not just journalists, but similar to the trend of Substack and these newsletter platforms where you're kind of finding a niche group of patrons that can support you. This like Web3 in principle could be an even less mediated version of that, where you have more control over the content that you produce. And so like we're moving in that direction. It's still very, very nascent though. Like the whole kind of, you can't even call it an industry yet of Web3 journalism. We're still trying to like suss out what that looks like.
That sounds super interesting. So I'm curious on the like immutable or censorship resistant side of things. Do you find that that's something that journalists like intuitively sort of get? Does it depend on the journalist? Yeah, kind of interested in what the reaction is there when you make that pitch.
Yeah, I mean, like the couple other people in the kind of like founding cohort of jokeDAO, Eric Mack, Crystal Street, Keith Axline, they have experience as journalists. I don't have experience as a journalist, and they have their professional networks of journalists, and like, they're having these kind of conversations regularly. And actually, in a few weeks, jokeDAO is going to be at the Online News Association conference in Los Angeles, so we'll get even more opportunity to interface with Web2 journalists there. But ultimately, yeah, I think that the big thing that that when they're interacting with Web2 or kind of legacy or traditional journalists, however we want to say, within with like Web3 as a frame of reference, that point about immutability and uncensorability is the kind of the big, like the aha moment. I think like once that registers, I think that's when the skeptically minded start to like accept that there could be a viable application of this technology for their practice. And I think a lot of that is just getting past all the narratives about scams and environmental damage, and also it's also just difficult on a technical level. Like, yeah, for that aha moment to come, you need to understand that it's actually like intentionally, programmatically, almost impossible to censor this network, this distributed database, and it's like by design. And I think once that like registers with people, especially within the context of journalism, I think that's when you get that aha moment.
Hell yeah. Well, before we move to closing questions, want to dive into Lobb3, right? Yeah, Lobb3 a little bit. Super interesting. I had noticed that Andrew Yang has kind of like made a foray into the crypto space. I saw him at Ethereum ETH Denver in February. I think he did some kind of like NFT project or something. So I had like seen that he's kind of tried to connect with the space. Super interesting to hear that he's like trying to go the DAO route or like build more of a decentralized community. So would love to hear about what you're working on there.
Sure. Yeah. And so like you're totally right. He is getting into this space. I mean, I'm not in his inner circle. I'm not, communicating with him personally. He's sort of like a founding like spokesperson or like champion for Lobb3 and kind of this space in general. I can't think of other, like there's a handful of other like recognizable political figures that are like speaking on behalf of crypto, but on behalf of DAOs, I don't think there are any bigger names than Andrew Yang that are kind of speaking in this direction. He founded Lobb3. He founded jokeDAO, which is about, I think, championing economic opportunities for Asian Americans. I'm not as familiar with that community, but yeah, I think he's a good spokesperson for this space. Forward Party in general, I'm still learning about them, but they may have some pro blockchain stances on like blockchain based voting or credentials on-chain credentials. I'm not familiar. I can't speak on behalf of them, but there's like a whole kind of emerging political movement, still very niche and obscure, but it's like it's getting a foothold, and it seems like the whole Yang Gang milieu is like central to it.
That's awesome. So what are you focused on specifically with Lobb3?
Yeah, Lobb3 has been similar to Pub DAO. Like it's had this kind of amorphous development. And like it started out as just like a DAO that needed to figure out what it was about. And over the last few months, we've gotten a better direction of like this is a DAO that's going to be advocating on behalf of like a human centered usage or like an impact usage, a social impact usage of Web3 technology, and then also funding the development of Web3, of like open source Web3 tools that can enable greater degrees of civic engagement. One of the ones that we're helping fund is a zero knowledge ID. I can get into details there. The team at Holonym is building that holonym.id. If you want to go to their URL, I'm happy to get into more details there. But that's one example of like a Web3 civic technology that we're helping fund, and we're hoping that'll be a piece in this puzzle of a larger plan that we're working on, where we want to enable like permissionless petitioning in a way that you can actually like solicit signatures of Web3 wallets for a given document that you post, and if we're able to have this ZKID working and this other platform working, then we may arrive at a place where you can screen for wallets that belong to US residents and residents in more granular districts as well. But again, like a super nascent young stage there. And then on the advocacy front, directly, there's a lot of ambiguities about what a DAO like Lobb3 can be doing in terms of lobbying activity, either direct lobbying, like meeting with policymakers, or grassroots lobbying, like taking a position on an active piece of legislation and encouraging some call to action to the public. It's kind of unclear how a DAO is supposed to be playing in this arena. Like if a DAO, can you incorporate a DAO as a 501c4, which would enable you to do this, but then might you have to make some sacrifices for decentralized decision making? And so that's kind of where Lobb3 is at. And also Lobb3 is helping lead the formation of the DAO coalition, which is really exciting. Now we have around 25 DAOs and a couple non-DAO organizations. And we're kind of, like pooling our brain power and eventually resources too, once we get a better sense of how we can actually go about lobbying. But just like establishing Web3 as a political movement, that's kind of where Lobb3 is working.
Yeah, it sounds like super interesting work.
Yeah.
I think it's so, like, all of these, as you've clarified several times, all of these initiatives are very early, right? In their development, whether it's, decentralized publishing, decentralized media, or decentralized or like DAO driven civic engagement and political engagement. But it's very encouraging to me that there's so many, like, if all I had to do in my life was do DAO talk interviews and I could talk to a contributor from every kind of DAO, even now in this very early state, it would take a really long time. Like there's so many of these different like DAOs doing different things. I think, even though, obviously there's going to be a lot of learning along the way about like what is going to work and what's not going to work, I think it's very good for people to like have kind of a way to engage with Ethereum and engage with this technology that is more like contributor oriented versus like investing. Everyone's first foray into the space historically has been trading. You mentioned it was for you, it was for me. Both of us are like doing DAO stuff, so presumably we didn't like send our net worth to like $1 trillion via our trading activities, and I think almost no one does, and that's because like not everyone's a trader, right? It's cool. And so I think having like all these different types of DAOs is like, I think, a very positive thing, because it allows people to sort of like interface with the space in a way that is more like, hey, I'm interested in this thing, by the way, it might actually be interesting to do that on Ethereum.
Yeah, and I think we're also still at an early stage of like this technology developing in non-financial ways, and then like following that will be like the kind of popular awareness of this technology as something more than just speculative investment in magic internet money. Because it's like, whenever I step out of this DAO world, 99% of people have like no idea what a DAO is. I don't know if you have this difficulty when people ask like what you do, or like if you're involved in DAOs and you try to explain it, it's like almost impossible a lot of the time. So I think we're still very early on in like this technology developing, and even arguably even earlier on in terms of popular understanding of this stuff. But I mean, then again, like, you don't need to know how the internet works to use the internet, or how a car works to use a car. So it's not like we need everyone to understand this. Maybe it's more a matter of trust, getting people to trust this technology and trust that there aren't a bunch of like predatory scammers out there. But yeah, like an early kind of like a media narrative still needs to like sweep the world to educate them about this. Not that would be like a coherent effort, but I think all these individual efforts we're talking about will play into that.
Yeah, it is very hard to explain like what a DAO is and working in DAOs. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot is like, it's just an internet of native way to do things. So like if you want to use Ethereum in some way and you want to do it with other people in a coordinated way, that's kind of like what I think of as a DAO. Is you're just trying to figure out, okay, like how do we use Ethereum to kind of like custody these resources and help coordinate our efforts. So it's not like we're doing something blockchain related, but then like the way we're doing it is not on chain at all and like not transparent, right? So, but even that's not like a great answer, yeah.
Because there's just so many. It's so like multifaceted, and it's like built upon like once you really get into this technology, you go down whatever rabbit holes. Like you're processing all this technical information at a fast rate because you're into it, and that puts you ahead of so many people in terms of like a technical awareness of this. And it's like figuring out how to take all these steps back and try to figure out how to explain this in a way that's intelligible to people that haven't put all these hours into learning this stuff. I mean, you're right. It's like it's tough, but we're getting there.
Absolutely. We're all gonna make it. I haven't abandoned WAGMI. I still think we're all gonna make it. Yeah. Most of us are gonna make it, maybe. Enough of us will make it. That's not as catchy of an acronym. Cool. Well, would love to transition to some closing questions. So the first one is a 2-part question. It's the first part is, what's your favorite part about working in the DAO space and why? And then the second part is, what's your least favorite part or something you think we need to work on as a community?
My favorite part, which I think we may have touched on earlier, is just like the people that you meet, like the kind of eclectic, talented, open-minded people that you meet, working, especially in DAOs in particular, beyond just crypto, because like if we're talking about just general investing, I think the really interesting people in this space are the ones that are like building all of mainly these non-financial technologies and things that have some kind of idealistic or social impact or like public goods mentality. I think it's really cool to find similarly minded people in this space. And yet, like one thing I've noticed, and I don't know if you differ, but it's really interesting to find people that are that you're similar to because they're like open-minded to multiple perspectives. And I find that really refreshing, considering how like polarized our culture normally is. It's like, speaking with people that are actually able to understand both sides of an argument. That's really refreshing to me, and I love working with people like that. As for something that I don't like, something that I found difficult in some of these DAOs is this kind of like facile expectation that like everything should be decentralized, otherwise it's not a DAO. And like on a semantic level, I do concede that in a lot of the cases, in a lot of DAO cases, the D and the A are kind of questionable. And I think that's not necessarily the fault of the organizations. I think it's like the term DAO, I think may set some false expectations in certain respects, because like not every aspect of an organization needs to be decentralized, especially if you're trying to develop some kind of business model. But I think the point of like enabling people to meaningfully contribute and to add value that they wouldn't have been able to add in a more centralized traditional organizational structure, I think that's kind of the value of this technology. But again, like a lot of it still, it still needs to be really tested out. Like I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about what DAOs can do and what they're good for.
Absolutely. One thing we've been talking about a lot at Tally is like there's different kind of like types of DAOs that I think have different needs in terms of like the tools that support them, how decentralized, how autonomous they are. I think the first successful DAOs were DeFi protocols like Maker and Compound. And there, if you have a supposedly decentralized like application, the protocol, and it has, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of like user funds in it, and then you have like a token where people can kind of govern over that protocol. Like, I think it's pretty important that it is in fact decentralized, right? That there's not sort of some like cabal that actually has control over everything behind the scenes that the community doesn't know about. And the autonomous part is pretty important too, because like when changes are made to protocol code or you're moving funds out of a treasury, it can be done in a much more like trustless way, if it's kind of done through this like on-chain proposal where everyone can look at what the proposal says. So I think that's part of like, I think the DAO term comes even before that, but like I think it's a lot better fit in the context of these protocols and like protocol treasuries and stuff. I think what we've been talking about here today is almost just like it's like a community that's trying to sort of like do stuff, or it's like an internet native startup is like a term we've been throwing around, where you're just kind of like, you're just like doing stuff on Ethereum with other people who have a similar interest. And like, I think still thinking about security and transparency is extremely important, but like these terms like decentralized and autonomous, I think probably mean something different than what they mean for like a compound. So it'd be interesting to see how that evolves as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I hadn't thought about it like that, but it makes total sense. Like the autonomous is like really able, that part of the term is really able to shine when you're actually governing something that's expressed in code and can be autonomous. Whereas if it's like a social welfare organization or some like a professional network, like what about that can be autonomous is still to be determined, I think. But I totally agree. I think the term DAO really does apply more in the cases of DeFi protocols. I think that's a good point.
All right. So actually, normally we just have one more question, but I'm going to ask two more. And the first one is not, is differs from our normal path. You mentioned you work in reality TV. Like, I just have to ask, like, what's your favorite reality TV show and why? Or you can just be like, I don't even like reality TV. It's just a job to me. That's fine. Just give me your hot take.
I mean, the reality show that I worked for a few years was Big Brother. Did a few seasons of Big Brother, and it was fascinating working for that show. I'm not too familiar with the reality television landscape, but I don't think there are many other shows that are like the content is being produced 24/7. I think that was a fascinating business model for how that works, and it was really cool. Like being able to be involved in that. Like I was a production assistant, and we had our shifts. There's like 12-hour shifts, always like rolling over 24 hours a day. So there's always PAs there, and like doing night shifts, and it was a really interesting, I think, idiosyncratic show, and I would say that's probably my favorite if I had to pick a reality show.
That's really cool. I'm sure you've got some stories there, but we can talk about them off the air. Cool. All right. And the last question is, what is your favorite place in the world and why?
I think a simple answer here. I live in Los Angeles, but I have relatives in the Bronx in New York. And there's a really good Gaelic pub there, like a college kind of theater kid pub called Unbeelbocht. I think they have it's a really cool bar, no TVs. They have a good craft beer selection. Interesting people show up there, some students, some locals. I always like hanging out there when I'm in the Bronx. That's the first place that comes to mind for that question.
That sounds amazing.
And I'm Irish, so of course I would pick a bar for my favorite place.
Hell yeah. That, like, I totally want to go hang out there. That sounds cool. Sounds dope. Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on DAO Talk, Clinamenic. I look forward to continue to like work with you on stuff going forward. And I think everyone's gonna really enjoy hearing from you.